Hello, hello.
It's on mute.
Good thing. I
Nope.
hear you.
No longer mute.
No longer mute. And invisible. Cheers. Just trying to get this out of the blur zone. There we go.
Hey, Steve, did you retire
From what?
from what your work residence?
No, not really. I just stopped working for jerks and greedy people,
Ah, but
which
so,
which means that there are very few clients I can work for.
yes. So here you are in town working with a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I do that, but I'm actually still working with schools, several colleges, some private high schools, one public system. And I'm working with a couple of clients I just dearly love and really want to see succeed.
So one of the rooms at your new house is an office or?
Yes, it's this chaotic mess I'm in the middle of, all blurred behind me.
All blurred.
Yeah, the downstairs is for working. Gail has the big room with the north light for her studio, and I have the little room completely crammed full of, I don't know,
Stuff.
2.5 rooms full of stuff. As my
Yeah.
office.
Well, you can't take it with you.
It's true. You know, I decided I'll stop complaining because this is the classic first world problem. We just have too much stuff.
Hi, Sue. I'm getting
Hey,
off.
Sue.
Oh, don't get off. It's all right.
No, I mean, because the real people are coming.
I know, Sue looks so serious. Very serious.
I don't mean to be all serious. I'm discombobulated.
It's
Sorry.
it's the look people get when technology is not working perfectly for them. They need to worry about it. I have it often.
That's better.
Well, Olga, guess where I am going this weekend?
Timbuktu.
No, Amherst, Massachusetts,
For what?
for my 50th college reunion.
College. Wow.
Yes. And before you ask, yes, I am still the youngest member of my class.
Good.
Well, I'm working on my 55th dental school reunion, and sadly, there are less and less people every year. So,
So there.
and I was the only girl.
And there have to be some terrible jokes about that, but congratulations.
All right,
Enough
I'm
chit chat. Good evening, Peter. Hello,
Good
Ron.
evening, how are you?
As well as can be expected when I can't find anything and I'm living out of boxes.
Well, it'll take a while.
It does. I can't make a decent cup of coffee here. Sue, I sent you an email, but I think I've solved the problem.
Okay.
It was I wanted to conduct at least one roll call vote, and to do that, I need to know who are actual members, you know, by select board appointment.
Oh, okay. So, and did you find the answer or do you need me to figure it out?
I think it's the names on the back of the draft thing we created for special town meeting. Can't see
And
it.
it
in
should be
blue.
on the website. So I'll bring up the website if you want me to, we can cross-check.
That'd be great, because it's a big task force. 2,
It
4,
is.
6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 members. I think we may have Scott Horsley in the house. We have a person with a giant S. Suppose it could be Sue Brown. Aha. Good evening, Scott.
Hey, Steve.
Is the boat afloat?
Last time I saw it was still on top of the water.
Good.
All good, thank you.
Good evening, Sue. John Round. David, is that David Lumsden? Hello, Gordon. Hello, Jeff.
Hello.
It must be 6:59. The church bell is ringing.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, David. Thanks for coming.
I'm making my favorite chicken soup during the meeting.
Okay. I'm glad to know that. Are you using drinking water or gray water?
I always use filtered water in Manchester by the sea.
Mhm. Excellent. Excellent. Well, if we have 18 people, I suppose we have a quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I actually have no idea what would constitute a quorum for an 18-person task force. Anyone have an opinion on that? Any Robert's Rules of Order devotees? Good. That's encouraging. Well, it is 7:01, so I will call to order this June 1st meeting of the Manchester Water Resources Protection Task Force, and welcome you all. We're holding this under the auspices of the Select Board and holding it remote in accordance with various proclamations by Governor Baker. We will attempt to allow public participation with all the normal caveats about keeping your video off if you don't want to show your face, and using the chat for technical issues, not for substantive ones. And we actually intend to take a roll call vote tonight, which I think will be a first for us. And that's the only announcements and welcome I have. Are there any other announcements, Sue, or others? All right. The first item of business is the proposal we've had for some time from Scott Horsley to do work, I think, through the end of this month, or at least until funding from the next fiscal year budget becomes available to the task force. And that proposal was discussed and refined a bit by Greg Federspiel, and I believe sent out shortly after the last meeting, right, Sue?
Yep.
So does anyone have any comment on that proposal? And if not, could I hear a motion to accept it?
Before we do the motion, can I just chime in to clarify a couple of things? So when we met last time, I think I had misled people into thinking that Scott's proposal was actually a contract. I know Anne had said that she would like to read it, and now that everybody has seen it, you can see that it's not officially a contract, it's a proposal. So I think what we need to really vote on is to say whether or not the task force is wanting to engage Scott Horsley to be a consultant to the task force at a rate of $200 an hour. And what will, assuming that vote goes through, what it would happen is that the town would then create a purchase order to charge his invoices to, and that would go through me. So what would happen is Scott would just give me his invoices as the work gets completed, and then we would pay him that way. So I just wanted, before we do the vote, I thought it might just be helpful for everybody to sort of understand a little bit better what I feel like we're voting on. I'm also not good with motions because all that stuff isn't really in my wheelhouse yet. But I did want
I
to
appreciate
clarify that that's kind of what we're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Sue. As one of the inactive attorneys on the task force, I'm inclined to agree with you and also to put in the motion the scope of work, which is the duration and the expected amount of work, which are specified in his proposal. Unless anyone has an objection to that, those would kind of be the bare minimum elements of what can become a contract and a purchase order.
Okay.
Okay.
John Round and Scott Horsley both have their hands up. So
Can I just jump in quickly, Steve, and ask, should I log off for this discussion? I'm a little uncomfortable. I would like people to speak freely, and I can log off and log back on. Would that be appropriate?
Certainly, we're not in
I'll
executive
in.
session, but
All right, I'm going to do that. I'll be back.
we'll take care of your tender feelings, Scott. John, Scott's gone. Speak your piece.
Okay, it's a good thing. Not really. I don't think there's anything controversial here. You had mentioned the term here, and I saw on task one that goes through July. I know that Greg had appropriated a certain amount of money in advance of the fiscal year. I don't recall what that was, but I think it was less than whatever the total is here. But do we want to define that as just April, May, and July, because those are the only dates we know at this point, or should this go longer?
Now, this was meant to run only through July and was meant to be significantly less than the amount Greg said he had allocated.
Yes.
So unless I'm wrong about either of those two things, I think it's still appropriate to treat it as a first proposal to be followed by something starting in July, which we'll subsequently vote on.
Okay, so
fair?
maybe we should put in a line there that says that this is an arrangement through July 31st or something.
Correct.
So,
So it would be at the stated rate, $200 an hour. It
Yep.
would be for the scope described in his proposal and a duration of work through July 31st.
mhm.
All right, let's, Nate, a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to note, unrelated, the meeting link on the website was taking us to a
with this,
alternate, a previous meeting. So there might be
dear.
some people that don't,
Yeah.
but it did work, obviously if you go through the meeting invite.
Yes. So the website link is out of date, and the invite on the agenda is accurate.
Correct, I believe, yeah, or at least the one, the link in the Outlook invite.
Yes, that would explain a couple of people who said they'd be here who aren't. Sue, would you be good enough just to blast that agenda out again? You can send it to everybody. We'll just, those of us on the call will ignore it. Thank you.
Steve, I'm ready to make the proposal if we're ready.
Yes, I think we are. I'm just reading that if the task force is 12, the quorum is half plus one, which is 7. And therefore 4 people would be required to pass a resolution.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that the task force approve the proposal by Steve Horsley
Scott,
for his work through July 30th at the rate of $200 an hour.
excellent. Is there a second?
Second,
Second.
Moved and seconded. I will call the roll. Please indicate yay, nay, or abstain. Let's see, Peter Colarusso,
Yay.
Jeff Koshan,
Yay.
John Round,
Yay.
Gordon Turner,
Yes.
David Lumsden,
Yes.
Ron Mastro Giacomo,
Yes.
Jessica Lamont.
Yes.
Randy, I'm struggling to see if you're a duly appointed member or just an invaluable resource. Olga Hayes,
invaluable resource.
Olga Hayes. She's an alternate,
Alternate,
correct, and you're not, your
non-voting.
your primary is here.
Yeah.
All right, Fred Wales,
I'm a worker, not a board member.
okay, and Helen Bethel.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so it is unanimous and at least 4 votes were cast in favor. Thank you. Next is our preparation for the June 11 special town meeting, which I understand is no longer on the calendar. Does anybody happen to know, is there a new date?
I can address that, Steve. It may be June 28th or 29th, but the decision is going to be made on Monday, June 6th at the selectmen's meeting.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Well, that being the case, if it is in fact still in the month of June, I'm inclined to stick with our plan of doing a little publicizing at that meeting and using that date as an occasion to run some stuff through town sources and the cricket and whatnot. Any advice about that? Do you think we're moving too slowly? If we wait, that'll be almost a month from now. And then, of course, it may not transpire. Well, let's stick with that for now.
Sorry, did we rule out putting them in? I guess we were too late for the water bills, right? So we didn't want to do it that way.
Right.
We were too late for the water bills. But we could always do a tax bill. I'm not sure when those go out again. It was my job to figure that out, and I forgot about the tax bill part of it because I knew we had missed the opportunity to do the water bill. So I can follow up on the tax bill and see if we can do that. Because it was discussed at the last meeting that we should probably consider doing both.
Mhm.
Because there are plenty of people who probably won't go to town meeting that we want to get in front of anyway.
And are we sending paper things to everybody, or like printing out a ton, or was this going to be like, here's a little link, go online, or I was just wondering how much paper we're producing with this.
I don't think it has to be anything big. I mean, Steve, you and I had talked about, making something half a sheet of paper at the most,
Mhm.
possibly. We can definitely look at a way to do it with as little paper as possible.
Yeah, the idea would be to get them, if they're interested, to go to the website, call one of us, et cetera.
Okay, perfect.
Any other comments on publicizing around special town meeting? Okay, the other update is about the proposed Board of Health regulations concerning groundwater and other things. Peter, any update on that?
I believe that the board members feel very fortunate in having all of the talent and skill of this committee vetting that proposal. So I think it will be very well received. There are some questions on procedures For instance, section 4.2 says the application for the health permit must be submitted within 24 hours of submittal of all other requests for permits. Nobody understands why that's in there or how that impacts it. And it is inconsistent with our other policies. So we would probably scrap that if you decide to forward this, if the committee decides to forward this to us. I'm not sure whether the committee would want us then to return it to you for another review, since it's mostly procedural things, not necessarily technical or policy statements. So I would ask for some guidance on that, assuming the committee wants to forward it to the Board of Health.
I think first, you're right. First, we need to have a discussion about the reactions people have who've read this. And for my money, I suppose once we've set our piece on it and you've voted it up or down, if it votes up, I guess I would appreciate a kind of a review period, but I don't expect we'll have to take another vote on it unless you make a significant substantive change. If you're doing things like changing required deadlines, I doubt if that's going to be substantive. Does that make sense to people? So has anybody made it through this set of proposed regs and have a comment to register? All right, you're all forgiven. Summer is beginning, but I would urge you to take a look at it before the next meeting, and we'll put it on our agenda to move it forward. The Board of Health is waiting for us, and I think we're probably a little impatient. Is that fair, Peter?
We want to strike while the iron is hot.
Mhm.
So, and we're going to go through the process of public hearings and all that. So it may take some time before we actually get to implement it.
Yes. Good. So that'll remain on the docket, the agenda for next meeting. Now we turn to our now duly voted and certified consultant, hydrologist, geohydrologist Scott Horsley, for some comments and maybe some materials about the Gravelly Pond watershed, and any comments you want to make about the various controversies around that, including the development out on Essex Street and the recently passed decision of Hamilton to pave Tobacco Road.
Hey, thanks, Steve. And with your permission, I'll share my screen. I've just got a few slides that will outline this.
I'll just
I think
make
I need
sure
to be
you
enabled.
can. Yep, you're good.
Yep. Okay. Great. And you should be seeing a slide with a watershed on it. You see the Gravelly Pond watershed?
Mhm.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you. I've just got about 8 slides or so. I've been looking into 3 items that I'll just update you and brief you on. The first is the subject of should the town consider some additional protection areas for the Gravelly Pond, Round Pond area. And this is the map from the 1990 Horsley-Witten report. This was delineated using surface watershed topography. So this basically identifies where surface runoff would drain from across the surface of the land. I should also add that this is not a very detailed map. This is a 10-foot contour interval USGS topographic map, which may have been the best that was available back at that time. So this was a good start, but as I've looked into this, my feeling is that there is in fact some benefit to considering some changes, and I'll just kind of outline what I've been thinking about and seeing. And I think I showed this map the last time. This is a geology map of the area, and one approach to thinking about this, in addition to a surface watershed, is to look at the subsurface geology. And what we're seeing here, these coarse coarse grain deposits that surround Gravelly Pond and really go through this area. Those are pretty highly permeable sand and gravel materials where groundwater will move fairly rapidly. The hatched area represents sort of the other end of the spectrum. These are areas of glacial till and shallow bedrock where you don't have a lot of as much transport. So one way of delineating protection areas, again, in addition to the surface watershed, is to look at your geology and prioritize those areas that are more permeable, through which not only water would move, but obviously pollutants. So that, I think, could be part of the potential consideration. And I'll come back to this, but this is, I do want to point out that, in fact, let me move forward and I'll come back to this one. This is a map prepared, the town of Hamilton, and it shows some water resource protection areas. And I'll go in a little closer here and focus on the Gravelly Pond and Round Pond area. And I've added some arrows here of flow. So you may remember, here's Gravelly Pond right here and Round Pond. And you remember the watershed line that was there before, kind of came through somewhere like this. What this map is suggesting, it's really a composite of a bunch of things going on, including some so-called zone 2 areas for a number of wells. There's a couple of Round Pond wells here. There's also a couple of wells up in Hamilton. And all of these, when these wells are pumped, they change the groundwater flow directions typically towards the wells. So in fact, this groundwater flow situation is quite dynamic. It will change literally every time you turn on the pumps. So there's really a lot going on here. There's also this watershed line, this dashed line that appears on the Hamilton map that suggests everything to the east or south of that flows this way, and everything on the west side flows in that direction there. In fact, it appears to me that there is a couple of connections, potential connections between Beck Pond and Round Pond. As you remember, that this is an area where there's some highly permeable sand and gravel as part of a zone 2. So I have gotten a couple of reports from Nate DeRosiers. Thanks for sending those, Nate. I've only been able to read them quickly, and those will help identify some of these interactions. But it does appear that when you pump these wells around Round Pond, it may influence groundwater coming in from the north and the west from Beck Pond. There's also a surface water connection here, which is what I was going to show you earlier. There's actually looks like there's a stream that flows into Beck Pond from the west. So if that's all true, and again, this is based upon what I'm seeing so far, then the connection to this drinking water supply may go as far out as in this area here. There's also, looks like there may be a connection. The Woodard and Curran report, which is one of the documents that Nate gave me, suggests that there is an interaction between Koi Pond down here and Round Pond as well. So all of that suggests, all of that suggests that this 1990 watershed line might not be enough for full protection. And I'm thinking that a combination of surface watershed and groundwater areas and zone 2 areas might be a more protective and legitimate management area. Now, this map does also reference, and I'll go back to the earlier one, a 1985, I need to move something around here, an earlier 1985 study right here, the original 1985 study. And I am, I think, soon to get a look at that report. I think Ashley Oakes has been able to find a copy or get a copy. And so that'll be interesting because I'm not sure how those areas were delineated. But nonetheless, I think, some sort of a composite mapping of protection areas is what I'm thinking that I'd like to at least put before you for consideration as an amended protection area. Now, keep in mind, this is all in the town of Hamilton, and obviously these features that I'm talking about will also go off the map into Essex, over here towards Wenham, and certainly into Manchester. So this information that I'm showing you really needs to be expanded into the other towns. But what I'm suggesting that we consider, or you consider, is a combination of a surface watershed, the zone 2 areas, as well as some groundwater mapping and superficial geology. And I think we could put together sort of a 2 or 3 and possibly even a 4-tiered protection strategy. So it's going to take a little bit more work, but that's kind of the direction I'm heading. And Steve, I don't know if you want to take questions along the way. Let me just see what else I got here. Actually,
I have
more.
one before you go any
Go
further.
ahead, Steve. Go ahead, ask.
Could you show us where on that map Essex, Route 22 Essex Street is?
You mean 133 Essex? The development
whichever.
project?
Yeah,
Yeah.
where Tobacco Road ends.
Okay, so I had that up here. This is a close-up. I believe this is the parcel
Yes, that
you're
is. the
talking
part.
about,
Yep.
and his Tobacco Road. So this, in fact, the reason I put this in here, because this does show that stream. There's a stream that flows through that property, and it goes just a little off this map, but I believe it comes right into Beck Pond. So it looks as though this property is connected to, hydrologically connected to Beck Pond. And I'm going to, one of the other items I want to speak to you about is I have started to review this development proposal, and there is a moderately sized wastewater discharge up in this area that I have a map of that I'll show you, which is, I think, potentially connected to Beck's Pond and then subsequently connected to Round Pond. Does that answer your question for now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions so far? I've got a few more slides, kind of switching gears, but that's what I have so far on the protection areas.
I have a quick question. It's Jeff. When you say subsequently connected to Round Pond, does that mean through filtration underground, basically?
I think so. And again, I want to, I want to make sure there is no surface connection between Beck's Pond and Round Pond. One of the reports that Nate gave me, I think it might have been the Woodard and Curran report, documented a pretty detailed site visit where they actually went out and walked the whole area and looked for these connections. And my recollection is they did not find a surface water connection between Beck's Pond and Round Pond. But given this, this zone 2 map here, and these are, if you remember, the geology in this area is quite permeable. So I think there's a pretty likely groundwater connection. So yes, to answer your question, subsurface. So the water from this over this area, the water would flow via the stream, surface water discharge into Beck's Pond, and then some of Beck's Pond could flow this way under pumping conditions.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, let me
Any other
move on. Oh, go ahead. Another question?
Nope, I don't hear
Okay.
any. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been talking about with Steve, and actually another hydrologist that I work with who specializes in field work and instrumentation, is the possibility of going around the pond, gravelly pond, and looking to determine where the most groundwater is flowing into the pond. And this is the picture I'm showing here is actually a slide from a report, a study that I'm involved in down here in Cape Cod. This was actually done by EPA. And what you do is you go in the middle of the winter and you put in very shallow wells or piezometers and just literally take temperatures, because groundwater stays the same temperature year round, and around 56 degrees Fahrenheit, 57, 55 in that range. And of course, the surface water will get down to a lot colder than that. So what we can see is when you put these wells in, as you can see in this diagram here, you can see areas that are colder and warmer. And what this is suggesting is this is the area where most of the groundwater is entering the pond. So this is something that we could consider doing for a gravelly and or round pond at some point in the future. It's the nice thing about it is this is about a 1 or 2 days worth of work. In fact, I think this is all done. I think it says here September 18th, because you can move pretty quickly with this shallow piezometer and make these measurements and thereby document groundwater discharge areas. This is a pretty more and more common technique that people are using to sort of document interaction between groundwater and surface water. So the person that I'm talking to about this is suggesting, her name is Dana Treslow, by the way, And she's done this on a number of other sites. And she was suggesting if we wanted to do this, that it would be best to wait until, late fall or even winter to get the best demarcation. So we have plenty of time to think about it, but it is a technique that I thought could be helpful if in fact at some point in the future, that's something that we want to either confirm or learn more about in terms of which sides of Gravelly Pond or Round Pond where most of the groundwater contribution is occurring. And then here's just a picture of Tobacco Road, and I'll just kind of maybe transition into a couple of comments on that. That's the second thing I've been looking at, is the project that's pending to pave Tobacco Road. And I've reviewed some of the engineering plans for that project, as well as a slideshow that I found. And I think that's been about it so far. But as you all know, this road does come in pretty close to both Gravelly and Round Pond. And the plan is to pave it and add what I'd consider some moderate stormwater management systems. And frankly, the more I read about it, the less comfortable I got with the project, to be perfectly honest with you. And I know Steve attended a Conservation Commission hearing, which I was unable to attend. I wish I had a conflict, and I'll let Steve speak on that in just a minute. But my sense is that there hasn't been a lot of due diligence and detailed looking at this project. A couple other quick slides. This is one of the pictures I found somewhere that I presume is sort of what the road looks like now. And then I guess one of the concerns I have is when you pave a road, you typically get a lot more traffic and service on it. And the transportation engineers refer to this as level of service. And here's a study which is I've been using for years by a very well-known researcher out in Wisconsin, associated with the U.S. Geological Survey. And he's published a lot on this, and a lot of people reference his work, including myself. And what he's showing here is actual data that links level of service, traffic volume, with concentrations, in this case of 3 metals. But you see the same thing with some hydrocarbons that are associated with emissions from internal combustion engines, et cetera. So there's a fairly clear documentation that the more traffic you put on the road, the higher the pollutant load. And I might add, some of these pollutants, like these metals and the hydrocarbons, are not things that are typically get treated by, let's call it the average kind of stormwater systems, like grass swale or an infiltration basin. These things are typically not treated that much. So I think there's a legitimate concern here about the project. And I think I'm pretty convinced it would be better, just looking at it from a water quality perspective, to probably leave it as a unpaved road. I also did find, oops, I thought I had one other slide here. I'm sorry. I did find a report done out in the Berkshires that was done under contract with the DEP and EPA that basically is about this subject of how to maintain good unpaved roads from a water quality standpoint, because of course they have a lot more of these out in the western part of the state. So Steve, maybe I'll just stop there and ask you if you want to comment on your attendance of the Conservation Commission.
I can do that briefly. And in fact, John Round, I believe you attended. Well, I know you attended part of it, and you may have stayed the course. It was a lengthy meeting, almost 3 hours, on the subject of so it was a Conservation Commission in Hamilton, which previously permitted the paving of the road with the assumption that it would be reconfigured. It would be moved in that little stretch near Gravelly, about 100 yards further away from Gravelly, and kind of over a little natural ridge to prevent stormwater from cascading down, sheeting down into our reservoir. So this meeting last week was to amend that existing order of conditions, just pertinent to that one little stretch that is very close to Gravelly, which they now intend to pave where it is. Yeah, as Scott is pointing out, it's the yellow The red was the original order of conditions, but as you all probably remember, we voted down the land swap required to make that happen with Hamilton at our town meeting last summer, kind of narrowly. And John can comment more on the possibilities of, which I gather didn't materialize, of revoting or bringing the issue back up. Anyway, Hamilton has gone on its own to do this, and the Concom reviewed it. They did allow me to speak, not on behalf of Manchester, but as an informed neighbor and Concom chair. And I simply asked them if we could have a continuance, if the applicant would consent, to 2 weeks, to give time for this group to meet, for Scott to do a little due diligence from the expert standpoint, and frankly, for the Manchester Concom to meet, which we did last night. But that was to no avail. The Hamilton Concom voted unanimously 4-0, minimum quorum, to approve the order with very few conditions. For example, this road can be salted. Now the DPW asserts that it will be cautious and use less salt or maybe other chemicals, but there's no requirement of that. And again, I just as an observer with some experience in this, I think there were some serious procedural shortcomings, such as not preparing new maps of the wetlands. The Concom went off the maps from 18 months ago when the original filing was made, which didn't show wetland delineations either for Gravelly Ponds Bank, which is critical, nor for a perennial stream that runs just at the north end where those two roads would have divided. So I was disappointed, particularly by the lack of collaboration. And I'll stop there. John, anything you want to add to that?
And I'll add a few things to that if I can, Steve. Yeah, I did stay through the whole meeting, and as Steve correctly says, they voted to unanimously to move ahead with the paving of the road. They really pretty much hold the right to be able to do that. And both the town manager as well as the head of the DPW were at this meeting and said there have been multiple discussions, which is true over the past 2 years or more with regard to this. But they have a financial bonding event that they have put together for this. And I guess you lose the money if you don't start to use the money by a certain date. And I think that was a big driver with regard to Steve's request for a delay, because they have to start using that money by August, in the month of August, or otherwise they lose it, and they felt any kind of a delay would be a problem. We did ask them for a number of concessions with regard to what's on the road, when is it on the road, what are you doing with regard to treatment. They demurred really pretty much on all of that. And in fact, I think the DPW had really wanted to do some traffic analysis on what would happen with the road once it's paved. You cannot really do an analysis when it's not paved, because of course your expected traffic load and the kinds of vehicles are not going to be using that now. And that would change when it is paved. They've got a stormwater program or management plan that they discussed at. I am not an expert on that, but I do think that we need to see what that is all about and just how extensive and how effective that may be. But that has yet to be done, at least on our side. We asked about limiting salt, and they said they plan to do low salt, but we're interested in calcium chloride or something else, and preferably no salt on that. They kind of demurred on that and felt that they would handle that after it was paved. I don't see how, if it's paved and they do a traffic study, that's really not going to affect our concerns with regard to salt and what it can do to the groundwater. We mentioned the fact that we don't want hazardous materials on the road, or perhaps trucks over a certain size. As Steve had pointed out in, or I guess in one of the slides that Scott had shown, that are incorporated into the rubber and tires, and that winds up getting deposited on the road. And the bigger your vehicle, the more deposits you have of that. So yes, this is it, zinc, lead and copper. Who knew that stuff was all in truck tires, but I guess it is. And the bigger the truck is, the more it deposits, there's more pressure on your the road. And we're concerned about that. That can be addressed pretty much by just saying, we don't want vehicles over a certain size on that road. And you don't need to test the traffic to make that decision. That needs to be done. That's a decision that can be made before the road is ever paved. They demurred on that as well. I guess those were the major concerns. Both the town manager and the public works head are going to be at the select board's meeting here in Manchester. We'll attend that on June 6th. And we intend to press them on these issues to try and get some sort of agreement that these are the kinds of things that they will do. And some of these aren't necessarily, as I say, dependent upon a traffic study. You can make these decisions right now.
Well said, John.
Observe
Thank you.
that particular area. So we'll see what happens in that discussion. And I think I'm pretty sure that Chuck is on this call. Chuck will probably be at that meeting as well.
In fact, Chuck, you have your hand up, so if John
Yeah,
permits,
Chuck's there.
We'll switch over to you, Chuck.
Yep. So I guess I just wanted to chime in on a couple things. I was on the Concom call as well, and certainly the ship has sailed on moving the road, I think, unless there's some last ditch something. But I don't think it would be friendly. It would have to be more some sort of lawyers involved or town councils and so on and so forth, and people getting to that level. But I guess what I want to focus on a little bit is that going forward, there are still several things that we should do and we can do. Talking about level of service, right now I would say it's very much a local road. Some people might brave it to cross through from Hamilton into Manchester, but there is a section of this road before you get to the 128 on ramp off ramp in Manchester that isn't paved still. It's in Manchester jurisdiction, so I have no current plans to pave it. If Hamilton had never decided to pave their side of the road, I actually would have considered paving our side, but now I think that is obviously not going to happen because we don't want to make it a thoroughfare and have it be a area where lots of people are coming. But I think beyond that, we can certainly limit the weight restrictions and the hazardous cargo on our side, and we could certainly enforce that. I think that and I asked on the Concom meeting, and I have a fairly good relationship with Tim Olson, who's the DPW director over there, but we should certainly ask for, and we should make sure that they're going to have these stormwater infrastructure be part of their MS4 permitting. And I asked that we get copied on those O&M plans. I assume their order of conditions has certain O&M requirements in it, and so I asked that we get copied on those things. And then the other thing to just keep in mind, I don't want to play devil's advocate, but I would much rather they move the road, but that's certainly we have to look in the mirror on that one. That's something they wanted to do as well. But regardless, this gravel road in its current state is also very detrimental to the Gravelly Pond water supply. They have to grade that road constantly, and so they're using their old diesel graders and backhoes to grade that road. It's all sloping towards the pond instead of away from the pond. So all of these sorts of things, the dust is horrible, which is traveling directly into the pond. All that dust is also contributing these pollutant loads. So it's not like it's one for one. None of this is in a vacuum. There's lots of things at play. And although I don't like the fact that they're going to pave the road, there are still some things that we can do to help the water quality from its current existing state as well. And so I think we should also focus on those things, and to the extent we can, try and hold Hamilton to some of the things that they have promised in terms of the upkeep and other things. So I guess I'll leave it at that, but that was just another comment
Great.
I wanted to make.
Thank you, Chuck. And we certainly appreciate you taking time from your evening. And that's true for Nate, Sue Brown, and Sue Croft as well. Just a couple of final comments about this. One is an update from the neighborhood. After I spoke, a couple of the abutters spoke up, and some of them are active in the effort to resist the development at 133 Essex that Scott referred to. And they have put together a group of the minimum, which is 10 citizens, and are prepared to appeal to the DEP, the decision under the Wetlands Protection Act. And they have even, they say, raised some funds to hire an attorney to appeal in Superior Court the part of that order that falls under local Hamilton bylaw. And their question to us was, will Manchester join us in this appeal as the largest and most significant abutter, and also the greatest, most vulnerable abutter in terms of our water supply? And I don't know the answer to that question. I think it lies with the select board, and it's frankly above my pay grade. But that may happen anyway without Manchester being involved. And it is worth noting that any lawsuit filed in Superior Court will not be resolved by August. So the threat of filing a lawsuit when August is the expiration date for the funding the town has, I think, is a very credible threat against Hamilton. The other thing I wanted to note is that one of the missions of this group is to develop some way of collaborating with Hamilton, Wenham, Essex, perhaps others, because of this shared watershed. And I really regret the fact that this particular decision and the upshot of our town meeting last year and everything else has really been a setback to the possibility of collaboration. There was a fair amount of chest thumping by, I will not name who, on that Concom call last week. And the thumping took the form of, this didn't come out of left field. Manchester had to know this was coming. Manchester has no say over what we do with our property, etc. So those are not voices of collaboration. And we need a strategy basically to put some of that toothpaste back in the tube as we move forward.
Hey, Steve, if I can just comment on that. It's an interesting situation because in a sense, they're putting Manchester a little bit less compliance with the state drinking water regulations. As you remember, I pointed out to you, the state drinking water regulations basically prohibit impervious development projects within their zone A's, the 400 feet of a surface reservoir, but for a new supply, a new source supply. But as Hamilton says, well, that's not their responsibility. It's in a different town. So there's a really I think challenging potential conflict. I guess it's more than potential at this point. But I think I agree with you completely that it strikes me that in addition to the mapping I was talking about earlier, developing some sort of a working relationship with Hamilton is going to be critical, because if this is how projects are going to get designed and reviewed, I think there's going to be some real serious threats to the water supply.
Yep. Jeff Goshen?
So are you guys talking about like the EPA or the state regulations that I thought had to be approved to pave this? I thought there was no way to pave this without approval from environment.
We were talking exclusively about the Wetlands Protection Act and the local wetlands bylaw in Hamilton. Those are the only matters that the Concom has jurisdiction over. Scott raised the state drinking water regulations. But as the Concom consultant pointed out, those are irrelevant. They're not part of the jurisdiction of the Concom. And as Scott just pointed out, they may be regulations that we're supposed to be following since it's our water supply, which is kind of a paradox. Does that answer your question? I don't know of any EPA standards.
Yeah, I guess it does answer my question, but my impression 6 months ago and 3 months ago was it could not be paved without significant approval process. And are we now saying that's just absolutely not the case?
Well, if I could jump in again, Steve, I think the
Please.
wetlands protection regs that Steve mentioned are clearly an important, compliance requirement. And frankly, I'm not sure they are in compliance with the wetland regulations. I've only had a first look at it, but I have some questions. I know I'm sort of new to the discussion here, and I certainly want to be sensitive to that. Hamilton's been working on this for a long time, but my quick review of what they're proposing does not necessarily convince me that they are in compliance with the state stormwater standards or the wetland regulations. They also have, as Steve mentioned, their own wetlands bylaw that they have to comply with. I'm not sure they're in compliance with that. There may also be a MEPA trigger, a Mass Environmental Policy Act trigger here. I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to look into that yet, but they
There
may
is.
need to comply with that as well. Is there, Steve?
Their entire project is under MEPA. It's, the reviewer and analyst has been appointed. It's up on the website, the MEPA website.
So I think that another distinction here is when the road was being moved, it certainly triggered the MEPA. And so they have the MEPA. This revision to the plan was only a notice of project change back to MEMA. Or MEPA. And so I think those are the distinctions. And actually from the eyes of MEPA probably, or, this is my understanding, I did have a conversation with Woodard and Curran as well before, who was the consultant, but they're actually, because they're not moving the road, they don't have to clear as many trees. And so I think from a MEPA point of view, the technical analysis of their impact is actually less because they are now basically rehabbing an existing roadway, even though it's going from gravel to pavement. So that's sort of a nuance here that I think is probably working in their favor when it comes to those things. And then the other thing is I think, and Steve probably knows this better than me, but it seems like they were arguing that they don't have to meet the stormwater regs because they're more of a redevelopment than new construction. And so that's kind of basically a way to get out of it. They only have to meet to the extent practicable, not meet them. And so that's basically how I think they're skirting these issues. That's not to say they didn't look at these things and do the best they could, but they're also, not thinking about the water supply, they're thinking about a roadway. So anyway, I think that's all I have on that. Right now.
And the 10 citizens appealing to Superior Court are challenging the types of topics that we're talking about?
Yes, and they're also concerned about Beck and Round, because the road actually, in the case of Round Pond, there's a culvert, a very short stretch of stream that runs from Round to Chabaco, I believe. If I have that direction right, I'm not sure. And Beck Pond, the road is the bank of Beck Pond for considerable length. You can see up there. So they're legitimately worried. And of course, they're worried about speeding where kids ride bikes and all those other things.
And your summary was that you don't think that any group in Manchester will jump on board with that?
Well, you correct me if I'm wrong about this, John, but I think it's entirely in the ball's in the court of the select board. And as John said, they're going to engage in some discussion, hopefully some back and forth about the things that would make this safer in terms of our drinking water supply as early as next Monday when you meet with Hamilton officials.
I did chat with Greg Fetterspiel about this a little bit. And I mean, he was not aware that there were abutters that were that were interested in filing suit here. I would say it is in kind of the hands of the select board and the town manager. I would say that Greg is not inclined to join on that, largely because any situation like that would create a pretty adversarial relationship. And we need cooperation from Hamilton on any of a number of fronts going forward, including dealing with water. And the task force itself and a collaborative sort of effort with all of the communities that are drawing on the aquifer that's here. So his initial reaction is there's more downside than upside to that.
I'll just
Yeah,
add one. Oh, sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I just don't see the promise for collaboration, where that's going to come from. So, I mean, that seems like a pipe dream to me. I mean, it seems like I don't mean to be a jerk, but could we put a gate on the end of the road to prevent the traffic from going up? I mean, I'd struggle to see where this supposed collaboration is going to come
Jeff,
in.
I thought you'd be out there with a pick and a shovel, enhancing the potholes.
Well,
But I
Also,
take, I
couple
take your
things.
point.
Can I just add a couple things, Steve?
Yes, please do, Chuck.
So a couple things. One thing, our operators, that you guys met, Ben and Ryan, they do need to do daily activities down this road. So leaving the plant, they have to go to our Round Pond well. We have to supply it with chlorine and some things of that nature. So there's always going to be travel from basically the Manchester side to the Hamilton side, regardless of any abutters or other through use. So that we got to keep that in mind. They also have a landfill solar array right there, as well as the Rod and Gun Club. So there are other users of this gravel portion of road that are legitimate, that have been there forever. In terms of collaboration, I guess the thing that I think about is the ability to move this road that was voted at town meeting. I actually, Steve, you can again chime in if I'm wrong, but I was actually leaning towards, it seemed like most people on the Concom and the abutters that you mentioned, and anybody else that was on that call, were more than willing to go back to town meeting, Manchester town meeting, and have us vote that again. The difference being that they still need to get Chapter 97 approval, which is a park, because there must be some sort of parkland or something, which takes a legislative session, is my understanding. And so therefore that process takes like a year. So it's not necessarily coming back to Manchester and being collaborative. It's that next part. And that's basically where their funding gets, lost. So, in the interest of collaboration, and, it's not my money. So, far be it for me to, dig into my pocket, but I'm just saying, if Manchester were to make the funding right somehow, or, split the difference or some other thing, I think they would be more willing to talk. I don't want to speak for anybody. I'm just saying, like, thinking out loud, that seems to be the avenue forward that preserves collaboration and doesn't jeopardize these relationships. But beyond that, it does seem more litigious to me.
Splits the difference in what cost? What would we contribute moving the road?
I don't know what the number is. I'm just saying that, they have a, probably million to, multi-million-dollar project to pave this length of road. They're not just doing the portion in red and, the adjacent portion that's, the existing gravel road. They're doing the entire thing from whatever it is, Route 22.
Yeah.
So, that's a multi-million-dollar project. If we were costing them that area in red, that's much less than multi-million. So they could still do their project, assuming that was something, I guess we really have no say in that because it already is a paved road.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, so
My whole issue with this whole road in red thing is exactly the charts that Scott showed at the beginning. This was my suspicion from the beginning. The real detriment, regardless of where the road is the amount of traffic that goes on the road. You pave the road, you make a thoroughfare from Pine Street exit, and you lose, regardless of where that section of red is. That's my personal opinion. So I don't really. That's,
Yeah, that could be, Jeff. I
Well,
respect your-
I mean,
respect your
again,
opinion.
it's not, people are allowed to pave their road. I mean, we paved Lincoln Street. It's not paved. There's other areas that you could point to where, we developed 2 schools right next to Lincoln Street. So I stopped short of saying they can't pave their road. We just want to make the best of that situation, which would be the opportunity in red, not paving the existing road or leaving it as a gravel road dumping into Gravelly Pond.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who haven't been there, I invite you to drive out to that point where the yellow is closest to Gravelly Pond. It's actually a very pretty spot. Some people park there and eat their lunch in their pickups. Because you're 64 feet, by my calculation, from the bank of Gravelly Pond, and you are 65 feet above the bank of Gravelly Pond. So you're looking at basically a ski slope from the road down to the pond. And in that condition, I have to agree with Scott, you need to design some very clever stormwater management systems in order to forestall everything. Salt, spills, the normal wear and tear of tires and hydrocarbons. And I didn't hear any effort to put in, shall we call them, state-of-the-art stormwater management to protect the neighboring towns' primary drinking supply.
Steve, if I could just jump in again quickly there. I
Yeah,
didn't
hey.
mention spills either, but it's clearly more traffic, you have a higher probability of spills. And so it's really the pollutants we talked about earlier. It's the road salting and it's the spill. I mean, frankly, putting a paved road in a zone A, 400 feet around a drinking water reservoir is something that, going back to EPA, because I've done a lot of work for EPA over my career, is something they don't recommend. That's why zone A is there, 400 feet. There's a strict, in the drinking water regulations, there are strict requirements over impervious surfaces, no more than 15% of a lot, no more than 2,500 square feet in a zone A. Because we've learned the hard way that by letting incremental land uses in critical areas close to our drinking water reservoirs is problematic. And you either end up losing the supply or adding very expensive treatment, carbon filtration perhaps, to get rid of these hydrocarbons. So that's, where I come from is this is the kind of project that frankly doesn't make sense in a water supply area. I'm not sure what the need for the project is. I haven't looked at that. I'm not in a position to weigh that, but I think from a drinking water perspective, this project doesn't make sense. And then the last thing I'll say is, again, I looked at the stormwater proposals and they're not that stringent. If one wanted, as I told Steve, you can design stormwater treatment systems to remove metals and hydrocarbons, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, and that's not part of the plan. The plan is to remove suspended solids from the runoff, not remove metals, not remove hydrocarbons, not remove salt. So I'll
Fair
stop
enough.
there.
I noticed, Nate, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just thinking out loud, kind of elaborating on what Chuck was saying. Depending on when, I don't know if they have already bid prices, if they have an annual paving contract, or if this is going to be a separate project going out to bid. But if they've, already got their bond, and so they basically have a fixed amount of money with the price of asphalt and oil going up, pretty significantly in the last 6 months, it could be very well that, they may not have enough to complete all of this paving. So, something that we do to try to help, when we're unsure of pricing, we do add alternates. So I'm wondering if there's a potential, to kind of give us some flexibility in trying to move forward, moving the road away to the, original intended path, is if they could do that that section as an add alternate, thereby giving us time, to essentially try to go back and, get it moved away. It's just one potential option.
That's a very good point, because the road past that red section headed to Manchester does not serve a single resident of Hamilton. It serves the Rod and Gun Club, the Mud Rats, the solar array, and the town brush dump. And of course, it serves our water treatment plant. But all of those uses are, accommodated within the current road. So it is worth thinking about. Thank you for making that point. I had forgotten about inflation, which is extraordinary in oil. And I'm going to recommend that we move on here unless Jeff, you have anything that's urgent.
I have just a quick point. What I heard, the reason that they want to pave it is it's a DPW pet project and no other real reason. So I don't know if we have any other information on that, but.
Well, it was, trust me, DPWs do not get pet projects. Come on,
Okay.
let's be real. No, I'm just kidding. But it's not so much a pet project as that, it went to town meeting. This specific project, not obviously they've changed course on the where the road is and paving it and so on, but it was brought to town meeting and approved, and it was Scott's totally right. They were basically, improving the level of service to the people that do use, the whole thing, not just the part by Gravelly Pond, but the entire thing. And so, again, going to economies of scale, they wanted to, do the whole road, not just part of it. So that's all.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Good discussion. And we managed to keep our tempers in check. At least I hope we did. And we've really covered that part of the working group's update as well about protecting Gravelly in the short term. I wonder if I could ask, and I'm not asking for any formal report on PFAs, but I know there's been a lot of back and forth unearthing of some potentially useful information. Jessica or Gordon or whoever wants to speak for the PFA fighters, can you just bring the task force up to date on what you're learning?
Hi, I don't know, Jessica, do you want to speak or should I give it? Okay. So we've just been discussing a little bit about in the sub-team 4, the quality and contaminants team, sort of what our roles should be around PFAs, because we, I guess we're still a little unclear. So we're more looking for clarification than anything else, but what are the types of things that this sub-team can do around PFAs to help the existing efforts? I know Chuck and his folks have been working with some consultants. I believe you mentioned that earlier on, and I'm sure Scott has been thinking about it as well. So our main questions right now are really just swirling around what are potential sources of PFA contamination in the Lincoln Street well. That's one of the main things that we've been thinking about. And we're not really clear on how one would go about figuring that out. If you just do test wells to sort of try to figure out where the levels are higher to try to find a gradient and estimate where the source might be, or if the sources are just distributed and there's no way to figure that out. So these are the types of things we've been wondering about. One thing, some folks have pulled up some folks on the team have found some nice resources that have spoken to artificial fields as potential sources of PFA. And that's obviously top of mind and something we'd like to look into a little further, since those fields are right on top of the well right now. And we understand that the school committee is looking into the need to repair or replace at least one of the fields. And so we may have an opportunity to talk with them about alternative materials and things like that, if there's, if we can help shore up that as a potential source. So these are the types of things we've been talking about. And then lastly, still kind of a nagging question for me is how we can have 2 labs coming back with sort of very different results from split sampling. And I don't know if we can push on that a little bit and try to figure out some details around the standards that they're using in their labs and whether they are calibrated against known standards and things like that, because it just feels like to have 2 labs consistently, one giving us at the limit and one giving us about half the limit, it would be nice to try to resolve who is correct about that, just to figure out if we have a little bit of leeway in when we have to act on this issue. So those are the types of things we've been talking about. Anybody else on the team wants to chime in, please feel free to do so if I've missed any points. Okay.
Good. Well, I think you're barking up the right trees, although I'd love to hear if any of the experts on the call, Chuck or Nate or Scott, have an opinion about, is it possible to trace the sources of PFAS? To begin with, there's thousands of them, and relatively few of them are tested for. So I know that's an obstacle. And I don't know whether you test surface or groundwater or storm runoff or how would you go about it? Any ideas?
I guess I'll go first. Scott might have different experience, but so a couple things come to mind. I mean, certainly you can test any available water or soil. They do test it. I'm not exactly sure the the correlation between soil testing and water testing. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. But like I've said before, we do test it, at the well. We tested it at Gravelly Pond. We've tested it at Round Pond. We've tested it at our landfill monitoring wells. There's a lot of area in between all those places and a lot of opportunities to, get more info. And so I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is, how much money can you spend on, the different testing, on various wells. So, literally any well that you, or sample of water you can take. Now I will say it's not just like going and, turning on your tap and, sending it to the lab. There's a, plethora of things that you need to keep in mind. And, this PFAS is literally in everything. And so you can't really, like I think the guidance for our guys sampling is, don't wear deodorant that day, no Tyvek, things along those lines, no gloves that have potential cross-contamination. So there's a lot of different things. And, however far you guys have gone down the rabbit hole, I mean, you hear lots of things about, things that aren't regulated for PFAS in the food industry, having, outrageous numbers come back. And so all of that stuff, gets in whatever leachate, whatever litter, whatever, upstream, downstream of your sampling, of your testing. So it's very hard. And, we did, Nate, I think has some input on the field stuff because we did, start asking those questions. So I'll let him talk about that. And then the other thing that you mentioned about the labs, trust me, that's every water supplier's nightmare is trying to figure out these lab things. But what it comes down to, and is that the state DEP, when they brought down these regulations, the labs weren't up to the standards that they needed to be, but they wanted to enforce these regulations, which may or may not have been the right thing to do at the time, but we are here now, and that's why we have these kind of issues. And it's not going away. I've asked the question at pretty high levels, what the heck, what are we supposed to do when we have these two numbers that are so different? And DEP's response is basically, I think their response literally was anything within 50% should be expected, which to me seems ridiculous, but that's what they said. And then what was the other aspect of that? So I guess they're really no help, basically.
Yeah, I mean, both, it'd be explainable if, maybe the labs were using two different testing methods. They're not, we confirm that they're using the same one. So and even our latest results, the lab that has been, historically higher, this month's result came in, slightly lower, whereas the labs that has been historically lower, their result came in slightly higher this month. So they went in opposite directions of how they've normally been testing. So it's like things that just you can't quantify, you can't make sense of, that, like Chuck said, it's just kind of frustrating. I think what consultants and, the industry as a whole is struggling with right now is it's not, we can, like Chuck was saying, we can test and we can kind of isolate and locate where it is how do we, once we know where it is, how do we treat it in situ? Can we remediate the ground, the soil, the water, where it is found, and what is that process? And that's in the very early stages, unfortunately, of the science. And there's been some pilot studies that just honestly weren't very successful from the the presentations I saw. It was very long durations to have any meaningful effect on reducing the contamination. So that's, that's really where they're looking now, is trying to, how does it move through the groundwater, and once they do find it, how can you contain it and how can you treat it? So those are the big things where, all the consultants, all the environmental groups, regulatory agencies are really looking at right now.
Mhm. And
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in about looking for PFAS. So, I think people kind of said some of this a little earlier in this call, but, basically syncing, monitoring well networks, taking groundwater, surface water samples. There are people, there could be potential sources in the town that, that we can look at, so that we're not sort of going out and, just generally just, punching holes everywhere. But, basically there's also forensic analysis that could be done to, to track the PFAS. But yeah, so I just wanted to add that,
Thanks, Randy.
there are a lot of
That's
people that are doing these kinds of investigations.
It's a little note of optimism, which we need on this subject.
Hi, this is Peter. I'd like to give you a quick update. The EPA now has said that there are PFAS in brake pads and synthetic motor oil. So they are doing a study to see how much of an impact the PFAS and those two ingredients have on the environment. The general feeling is that could be a source that may be added to the 6 that they already have to the test.
Yeah, I would say that the PFAS 6, they're basically separate little constituents. As far as the sources, there are many sources, landfills, service stations, etc. So it's, I think people have identified it's really can be anywhere.
Nate, back to your comments, statisticians always search for a signal amid the noise, particularly when you're looking at, I guess, what are picoscopic levels in this case. Are you thinking, just common sense, that what you're seeing between those two labs is essentially noise in the testing process?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. It's just so inconsistent that you can't really, from one month to the next, we don't know where it's going, and which, generally one lab has been lower and the other lab has been higher, but outside of that, there's no real, that at least in our limited testing that we can, put a correlation to, whether it's, seasonal, drawdown, whatever the case may be. I don't think we have enough data to specifically identify within our well yet.
so I guess our team would appreciate it if it's possible to get a little more detail from these labs. Just, hearing that you're seeing them flip over now is actually kind of comforting, that maybe it is just a noise issue. But at least from my experience testing other types of things in the lab, there's typically some error bars that are reported back around the test certainty and how certain they are about the level that they're reporting to you. And there should be the ability for them to report out what kind of standards they're using in any given test, or how they've calibrated their method or something like that. We'd be happy to look at it as a sub team if that's information that these testing companies can provide or are willing to provide, just to help us understand this a little better, right? If they say that it's 20 plus or minus 20 picograms per mil, that's really helpful. Or if they're saying it's 20 plus or minus 0.2, that would also help us understand their level of certainty in their measurement. So.
Yeah, we could certainly send you the full reports that we get, with the results.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate. And just for our purposes, what's the order of magnitude of the cost of testing a properly developed sample?
I believe we're somewhere, it's like $300 a sample. So we're spending like $600 for the split samples. give or take. That generally, I think we're getting a better deal because we're using Woodard and Curran has like a, has a corporate rate. And so we're getting that versus the town rate. So that's generally what it is roughly.
Got it.
Do you have a percentage of split samples that you're taking, or is it every sample you're taking is split?
So just for the benefit of the group, I'll try and be quick. Originally about a little over a year ago, we did exploratory sampling. And then the reg kicked in September. And so we started sampling in October, and there's a whole list of things you may be familiar. So I don't know if I need to go into detail, but basically, we had to sample at the point of entry into the distribution system. And then based on the results of that sampling, we had to basically follow it back. So to the raw water. In our case, we have the Lincoln Street well, which the raw water and the point of entry are literally the same. And then the Gravelly Pond, we actually had to take raw samples in the pond and then actually chase that back to Round Pond well and take sampling there. Then basically those got tested out because they weren't above 10 parts per trillion, and the limit is 20 parts per trillion. Whereas at the well, we were seeing, in the teens, and we actually had one hit at 20, but where judge or, DEP is looking for basically the quarterly average. And that is what constitutes whether or not we're over the MCL. And so then we decided that because before we hit 20, we were concerned enough with the results that knowing that, other water suppliers were having these issues, we decided to get split samples and use the other lab, because why not? It's a $10 million upgrade at the well versus a $300 sample just to see. And I've been told that we will be judged on all of the samples. So we're not throwing out the high ones and keeping the low ones or anything like that. And so basically that threshold of what's our average quarterly is now based on the 6 samples within that quarter, each monthly sample having a split sample. So that's where we're at currently. We could decide at any time to only do 1. We don't have to do 2. I have, talked to Greg, and, Nate and I have batted around. We've talked to consultants. We've talked to people at Mass Waterworks. We've talked to people at DEP, and the general consensus is the lab that's low is always low, and the lab that is high is always high. And some water suppliers have decided to only use the lab that has the low numbers because they don't want to go over the threshold and sign up for treatment. So I can appreciate that. However, knowing that we have a task force and very concerned citizenry, do not want the appearance that I am trying to take the low number and not the high number or anything else. And so I am willing to pay the $300 extra every month to get them, additional samples. But so that's where we're at.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the lab is doing the 2 labs are doing the analysis differently.
I believe they're not. And I will say there's only 3 in the entire state. So we're using 2 out of the 3 that are certified labs.
That was very
So they're using the same exact method?
To the best of my knowledge, Nate, that's correct, right? That's what we believe.
Yeah, I guess, those details will be in the lab reports,
And I'd encourage the working team to
Yeah, we'll send it.
follow up on this.
We're an open book. And I did, in case I didn't mention it last time, we do have a PFAS page on the website now that basically has the executive summary of the analysis we did to add potential treatment to Lincoln Street, as well as our sampling results and a few other hot links to just kind of elementary resources, EPA, DEP, and so on. So that's available.
Good. Very
I
good
have a
discussion.
question on the sampling of the water. When you take your samples, I think, Nate, you told me that you do take multiple samples from multiple sites. Do you mix your samples well and split the samples so that we have sort of a homogeneous samples from each of the sites and then send them out to the laboratories?
believe we're exclusively testing the Lincoln Street well at this point, isn't that right?
Yeah, each sample is completely separate. So Lincoln Street well is completely separate. When we do the split samples, it's, you know, one sample that we then pour into two separate, you know, of the sampling tubes. And that's for each location. So each location is handled separately.
Yeah.
And
Just- That's
we,
not my question. My question is, if we want to compare the two labs, they're both using the same methodologies, then I would then question the samples themselves. If you draw, let's say, 30 milliliters of sample, do you send, let's say, half of that, 15 milliliters of the well mix sample to one lab and 15 mLs of the other sample to the other lab, so that we're using the identical sample source for both labs?
yes, that's my understanding.
Okay. Yeah.
And just another point of clarification, the Lincoln Street is separate from Gravelly Pond. Like I said, Gravelly Pond has been testing below 10 parts per trillion, but we are still required to sample it quarterly. So we are getting results. We just do not have to sample it monthly. And when we did the quarterly sampling, we're still doing split samples on that sample. We're not just taking one, just basically as a data point for the labs to cross-check them with another sample.
Right.
But that's where we're at.
Yes,
Okay,
this serves,
thank you.
serves me right for asking for a quick update on PFAS. There is no such thing. But I appreciate all those contributions. And again, thank you, Chuck and Nate, for staying on task on this into the evening hours. Let me move us ahead to the two scheduling items we need. We need to pick a date for our next meeting, which would fall on June 15 if we stay with this Wednesday evening cycle. Any objections to June 15th, 7 p.m.? All right, hearing none, that will be our intent, and I'll ask teams 3, which is climate change, and 6, which is town responsibility and accountability, to give us an update. And I think team 6's will be particularly relevant because of this Hamilton paving issue. The other thing we need to schedule is, assuming the select board confirms this, an update to the select board on July 5th, which is still our intent. But of course, a number of things are in motion, not the least of which is the date of the special town meeting. Oh, and I suppose the actual membership of the select board, which may still be up in the air.
It is not up in the air. We've got our final group, the membership
Well,
on the
congratulations.
select board yesterday.
Congratulations.
So it's that has been solved with.
Is it inappropriate to tell us who's the victor?
And the victor was Brian Solosi. And in
Thank you.
fact, he increased his lead by 1 vote, so now he won by 2 votes. So it was very close to what the initial result was. So July 5th is still good.
Doable?
I think it's still doable for the select board. I guess it's a question, is it still doable for us, depending upon where we are?
Well, my notion was to give an update as a snapshot of where we are. And I think there's been enough processing on most of the working teams for that to be a pretty robust update. Still short of conclusions, obviously, and recommendations, but a number of things loom, such as how to protect the watershed with land acquisition or collaboration with neighboring towns. And I guess I'd like to make sure that every member of the select board is alerted that those kinds of larger issues are going to have to come up as we get closer to recommendations. Do you have, John, do you have a sense that the select board would like to hear more progress toward recommendations in July?
It's a new select board, so I can't say that I've got, I know how the winds are blowing there, but if we feel we've got some good, solid progress that they can understand, I would say that's fine, but I haven't checked with I guess Greg with regard to what else is on the agenda then. I don't know how crowded it is for July 5th yet, but I'll certainly know that by the time of the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Which leaves only changes or approval of the minutes that Sue's prepared for May 12th meeting, our last meeting. Are there any changes or additions? Well, hearing none, I'll move we accept those minutes as written. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jessica. It's moved and seconded. I'll ask for any objections or negative votes. Please raise your hand, make a noise.
No.
Not hearing any. Excellent, thank you. For Helen, was that a no? Apparently not. Any other items anybody wishes to bring up at this point? You have 60 seconds until 90 minutes is elapsed.
I know, you were turned off, I think.
I put on,
Helen, did you want to speak up?
no,
Please.
thank you. I'm not well.
No, I'm sorry. Well, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Very informative.
Always the case. I agree. So thank you all for attending, and we'll have minutes and agenda out, but those of you on groups, teams 3 and 6, think ahead to June 15 so we can have a useful report. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
You.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night.